Hello, happiness abounder, and welcome back. Today, I'm so excited to dive into how chaos in our brain, if we can calm it down, we can level it up. But before I get into this idea of chaos and frustration and being able to calm it down in our lives so we can get to those next levels, I want to share some exciting news about this episode's sponsor, which don't worry, it doesn't mean there's outside sources coming in and sponsoring the podcast, but I am deciding that I will sponsor the podcast with some of my own cool things, and I want to start with the Happy Score. So yourhappyscore.com is where you can go and take a quiz. It's 10 questions, it's only 2 minutes long to take, and you can find your happiness baseline. From there, you can make the determination if you'd like to increase your happiness every single day. And most people who take the score or take the quiz get a score anywhere between the 20s and 60s range, which means there's lots of opportunity for improvement. So go to yourhappyscore.com, get your baseline happy score, and from there, you can also click a button to schedule a free 45-minute meeting with me where we go through what I call a happiness habits review, an HHR. And in the HHR, we outline and we figure out the areas of your life where you could be increasing your happiness and increasing that baseline. So be sure to go to yourhappyscore.com, go check it out, take the quiz. It's all completely free, including the HHR at the end of the quiz as well. So some free resources for you to find your happiness baseline and do a happiness habits review. So that said, let's dive into chaos in our brain, calming it down to level up. I want you to think for a second. The last time you were in an emergency situation. Now, I'm not saying this to induce panic. I just want you to kind of remember the scenario. I'm willing to bet that while that scenario, the emergency, whatever it was chaotic and overwhelming, you probably, there's a high likelihood if you're a listener of this show that you fit this type, you probably jumped into action, solved what needed to be solved, you felt like you were in control of the situation, you stepped up, and then when the situation was handled, you went, wow, that was so chaotic. Now, I want you to shift gears and think about your last vacation. Chances are that it wasn't so chaotic. Hopefully it was relaxing. It was planned. You were in a space of calmness. And even if it was chaotic, it was fun chaotic, like maybe a trip to Disney World with your kids, right? But in both of those scenarios, there is something that is in common. One thing in common, whether you're on vacation or you're in a stressful emergency-esque type of circumstance. And that thing in common is that you have given yourself permission to focus. Now, stay with me. You're kind of like, what, Taylor, what are you talking about? Permission to focus. So in an emergency situation, everything else that is happening in your life, you immediately, instantaneously give yourself permission to drop focusing on those things and solve the emergency. You give yourself permission to focus. In a vacation circumstance, you've planned everything is prepped, ready to go. It might have been stressful leading up to the vacation, but in the vacation moment, you have given yourself permission to focus on the elements of the vacation and not focus on everything else going on. Ideally. I know some of us have a hard time shutting off on vacation, but that's a whole different thing. In both situations, you have given yourself permission to focus. So when I talk about chaos in the brain and when you feel like, wow, a big detriment to my happiness is this idea that I have so much going on and it's so chaotic and I just can't even focus. What is happening here is we aren't giving ourselves permission to focus. Now, a vacation and an emergency situation are very extreme scenarios, but they have that thing in common. That idea that you set the standard of focus in those moments. You give yourself permission to focus solely in one direction. Whether it's by necessity and it needs to happen now, or it's by choice in a vacation setting. So, when we look at our daily lives, we have this pressure and this chaos is put on us We accept this chaos mentality because we feel like we have to focus on everything at the same time. We got to focus here. We have to focus here. We have to focus here. We have to focus here. I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. Oh my gosh, it's so much. It just feels so chaotic and overwhelming. Does that sound familiar? Are you tracking with me here? Because oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times I have felt that in my life before I started on my happiness journey. And it was a big detriment, a huge deterrent to my personal happiness because I felt like I wasn't in control. I felt like everything was swirling around me and I was just trying to grasp at it and hold everything up, which mentally made me so drained, made me more prone to anger and frustration and all of these other things because I didn't feel like I knew what was going on and I didn't know that I could have permission to focus in a singular area one at a time. I felt like I had to. I had this expectation that I had to focus on all of it and it all had to be perfect. So the takeaway from today's episode, and I will share, of course, some tips and some things you do to have that focus permission, but the takeaway from this episode is you have permission to focus. It doesn't have to be in a vacation scenario. It doesn't have to be an emergency scenario. Instead, it can be in this space right now of your life. You have permission to focus. Because we all know, subconsciously, we are trying to hold everything, but we also know that by holding everything, keeping all those balls in the air, trying to grasp everything that's swirling around us and be perfect is not helping our happiness. And in fact, it's also limiting our ability to do well at all the things that are happening in our lives. So if you take one thing away from today's episode, I want to encourage you to have it be this idea that you have permission to focus. Because when you know you have permission to focus on a singular thing one at a time, then you can start to experience less chaos. You can calm down your brain to level up your life. Now, I know some of you are out there being like, seriously, Taylor, there's just so much going on. I can't just have permission to focus. Yeah, you can. You really can. I'm not saying drop everything and focus on this one thing right now for the next 10 days. Oh, no. I'm saying take 5 minutes and say, this is the 5 minutes where I plan my schedule for the day so that I know when I need to pick up or drop off the kids. This is my 15-minute section where I give myself permission to focus on eating lunch. This is my time right now where I list out all the things I have to do today and I prioritize them. I'm not saying drop everything and just focus on one thing for the rest of forever. No, I'm giving you the permission to take 5 minutes and focus on one thing at a time so that you can get to them all versus feeling like you have to handle them all at the same time and feeling chaotic. So that being said, a couple of tips that I have for you to do that. The first one is write it out. Write it out. Oh my gosh, so much of the chaos that we feel is because we are holding everything in our brains. We're trying to remember the to-do list, the schedule, the calendars, all of these things. We're trying to do so much in our brain, and if we just wrote it out, we'd remember it better. It'd be a lot less stressful. But for some reason, we feel like we don't want to have to write it out. So in that, it's that permission-based thing again. You have permission to focus. And that focus can be also focusing on that to-do list and writing out those things that you need to do. So that's number one. Write it out. It's so simple. But get all of that chaos out of your brain and on paper because then it feels organized and it feels more manageable. And you can calm down to level up. The next thing is set limits and calendar out your items. Don't spend 3 hours focusing on 3 different things. Spend 1 hour focusing on one thing. And then in that moment, you will get so much more done. You will feel so much more productive and peaceful and less chaotic than you would if you spent 3 hours trying to touch base on this, but then this is happening over here, this is happening over here, this is happening over here. And the reason I say set those limits and also calendar it in is because sometimes stuff happens and you're like, oh wow, I just have to jump over to here and do this. Well, if you have it on your calendar, then that's a set time that you've set a limit on where you can be moving forward instead of being distracted by everything that's happening and going on. And then the last thing that I want to suggest to you is to give yourself grace. For so long, we have been convincing ourselves that we have to handle and manage everything. And I can tell you right now, 5 years ago, if I heard this podcast episode, I'd be like, you don't know my life. I do have to handle everything. And yeah, it's chaotic, but that's just how it has to be, because I'm not going to relax and give up all these things that I need to have, because this is my responsibilities and this is my life. And I'm a go-getter, and you can't get me to calm down or relax, Taylor. I didn't say calm down. I did say calm down, calm your brain, but I didn't say you had to relax. In this space, it's more about organization and permission to focus. I'm not saying you have to cut down your drive. I'm not saying anything like that, because I'm a high-driven individual and I would hate to have somebody tell me that too. Now or then. But now I know that I have the permission to focus, and I get so much further when I have that permission to focus. I write it out, I set my limits, and I give myself grace if I mess up or something does distract me, because that's just going to happen. But having that grace, setting those limits, writing it out, being organized, and having that permission really helps me to feel less chaotic. And that is the point of this episode. Not to shut you down, to tell you not to do less or do all these other things. Instead, it's to remind you that you can feel calm and peace even if you have a busy life. And for so many people, this idea of a chaotic life is romanticized, but also a big deterrent to our happiness. So if we can do these few things, these minor adjustments, and accept that we have permission to focus, it can boost our happiness. So yeah, that's the episode that I have for you today. I hope that this episode has resonated with you. If it has, please share it with your friends, anyone else you think could benefit from it, and to grow our Happiness Abound community. I will also be providing a quick list of these 3 things in case you didn't have time to write notes, or you were in your car, or you were busy with something while you were listening, and you will be able to access that list in the Happiness Abounders Facebook group. And that's Happiness Abounders, plural. It's a Facebook, so facebook.com/group/Happiness Abounders. And you can join for free, and you can get all the resources and things there as well. Don't forget to go to yourhappyscore.com, get your Happy Score baseline, and set up your free appointment for an HHR, which is a Happiness Habits Review. So that said, I hope this episode helped. I hope that it resonated with you. I hope you know you have permission to focus. But above everything else, I hope you remember that you are capable of happiness abound.